Make sure you can get a folder. I have some random things like hand sanitizers, and for those who have that black bag like everyone else at the airport, they're little luggage handle covers and it can help ID your bag. So just a few little free things, Trinitarian markers. I usually have pens, but I ran out of them at the Presbyterian meeting. So know you can grab these at the end. But I'm so glad to have you part of this conversation today as we think about what does it look like to compose your legacy. And really what I'm here to help you do is so that you leave nothing unsaid, nothing left undone, right? Let me put that up here. When we think about legacy, the big question is, what is legacy? And each of us might have a different definition for that, a different answer that's based upon our context, our life experience. And there are a few dozen meanings out there. An old impression would be money or property bequeathed in a will, inheritance from a predecessor or a heritage. It really conjures the idea of money, prosperity, a will, inheritance. It can be legalistic. It can be musty, like those books. My dad died 2 years ago. I got all of his books, and some of them were in the basement. They were awfully musty, right? But not just wealth, but old money for some. That's what they think of. And that might make us wrinkle up our noses a bit, right? And we got there, honestly, because legacy is often conflated with other overlapping concepts into mean estate planning. And that's probably because it's the one thing that's hard and fast, right? And in an estate planning, we're actually relieved that there is clear and a proper path to our properly passing along our valuables to people and places that we love after our lifetimes. And there's an industry of experienced professionals that can help you complete that proper legal documentation. And that can give us some closure. But for when we look at estate planning, a big aspect of it is values, but that can seem optional. How might we pass on our values? There's no boilerplate for doing this, of sharing our values and our faith. The question is, where do you start? How do we share it? And so many of us never get to this phase, or we don't even say it. Since passing along our values is optional, it is often rare that it is done with intentionality. So unintentionally, legacy still happens, and if we do nothing, it's left up to others. And without a plan, it just loses momentum. It doesn't bring your why. It doesn't show your core values. You just end up having some outcomes, right? We all do some crazy things, but if others don't know our why, it may seem nuts. With the why, they turn into a hero. And golly, my dad, right before he died, he didn't know he was going to die. He had COVID. He died 2 days before the 21st anniversary of his first heart attack. So we were really glad he lived that long. But he had COVID and he died in his sleep holding my stepmother's hand. I had given him a hug and a kiss goodbye the day before and said to my 2 daughters, go back in and give Bushi and Poppy an extra hug and kiss because Bushi had vascular dementia brought on by COVID just 2 weeks before, and we didn't know what would happen. And I said to my girls, we don't know if Poppy or Bushi, one of them might not be here when we came back. I was thinking Bushi, not my dad, right? But that last day, he was reading to us a collection of stories he had put together that year with a gift from my brother, Storyworth, where they send you questions each week to think about, right? And what was so neat is we have this collection of stories that share his values, that tell of his life and his faith, of his grandparents and his parents and key people in his family and church that made such an impact on him, and what he hoped to share with his children, his grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. So values are optional, passing those along, but it's a great privilege to claim it. And what I hope to do for you today in this workshop is help you think about how you can share your values, your stories, how you might tell the why of the importance of sharing that, and claiming the privilege of doing something even after your lifetime. Legacy is what continues, being said, being done. It's meaning, it's relevant, it's teaching. It's a pathway left to follow, a tool left to use. So why even do legacy planning? Clarify your family values, prepare for future goals, provide for your spouse and dependents, provide for philanthropic goals now and later. What I don't have on there is making it easier for whomever you're leaving behind. By declaring what you want at the end of life, those tools, if they have them in proper form, will make navigating your death, though tragic, easier, right? My dad had a will, and we were scheduled to go and update it the week after he died, so everything was squared away there. But 4 months after he died, my stepsister Jackie died. She'd been in the hospital 9 weeks, and my dad's death was actually a lot easier than hers, as sudden as it was, because watching her deteriorate in the bed was so hard. She was widowed. She didn't have a will. And for those 9 weeks she was in the hospital, I kept saying to my big sister, Jenny, who's younger than Jackie, but the oldest in our crew, right? Have you talked to her about a will yet? She's like, I'm looking for the right time. But in the final 4 days of her life, when she went into palliative care, before they signed those papers for palliative care, they brought in a lawyer into the hospital to complete that will. Because Jackie was widowed in the state of Pennsylvania, her mother would have become the executor. My two sisters were doing Diana's bills, managing everything for her. She didn't have the capacity to do that for Jackie. Jackie was able to appoint her sister Sharon as her executor, and that made such a difficult situation so much easier. So that's another good reason for legacy planning. Different components of your legacy plan will include your will, durable power of attorney, living will directive and healthcare proxy, trust, tax reduction plans, guardianship for your dependents, business succession, charitable bequests, life income plan, and even sharing a little paragraph of the why. Telling your church or your family what was core to your life that you want to share. A small paragraph will do. A simple letter is a nice addition too. When we look at your will, we know that 50% of Americans don't have a will and they die intestate, which means Delaware decides what happens. Claim the privilege. Name what you want, even if you don't think you have a whole lot. Having a basic will can make things so much easier, and it's one of the most important steps you can take as you plan your estate. As you think about that, my big question for you is, where does your faith appear? Have you spoken about God's grace and love as the source of your faith? Have you considered your life and family values, including the church and its mission? I have actually a notepad. Oh, I'm making noise. And pen I'm going to pass around. I'm going to ask everyone if you give me your contact information, and I'm going to send you this PowerPoint so you don't have to worry about taking notes. But if everyone would write down their contact information, we don't share it at the foundation, but I'm not assessed on money coming into the foundation, I'm assessed on the people I'm connecting with. So that I can say, I actually had a room this full, is pretty grand, right? So if you fill that out, I will also have, if you have an email address, a way of sending you this PowerPoint presentation. As you think about where your faith appears, that piece that says legacy on top, we've just renamed it, and I didn't think of updating my slide. Legacy for individuals is the piece, it's in your folder. It outlines different ways that you can do that. You can look through that, read it, see what you're thinking about. When we talk about sharing what we have, I talked about the notion of tithing our estate. Now it's astounding. The average Presbyterian gives 1.9% to charity a year. Far from a 10% tithe, isn't it? But if we tithe in our death, that might be the first time we ever tithe in our life, right? And if we have $500,000, that'd be a $50,000 gift. If we have $100,000, that'd be a $10,000 gift. If we have $100, that $10 is still significant. If you name your church or another ministry, Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, I hope you consider Hanover first, right? But maybe you like Presbyterian Disaster Assistance or PW, you want to consider too. Think about, if you name them, it can be an enduring statement of faith. It provides for wise stewardship of your assets, provision for your loved ones. You get to support the mission and the ministry you love. And it provides you an opportunity to manage your accumulated assets. So if you have a will, people say, well, when should I review it? They often say people review it 5 years before they die, and so some folks are going to say, I'm going to review it every year then. Give me that extra year of life, right? But if you have recently had a child or adopted a child, that's a good time. Your children have grown or married, you've lost a spouse or a loved one, you've recently divorced or married, if you move to another state. Now, I know a lot of Jersey folks are coming to Delaware. So if you have any new folks come to your church, that you might say, hey, have you thought about your will? It's important to craft it in Delaware when you're coming from Jersey, right? If you change your financial situation, maybe you've retired or you've received an inheritance yourself, maybe you've purchased a vacation home or something, those are good times to update. I was telling Dr. Graham Walker that I need to update my will because when my friend died last year in Minnesota, she had her body go into the University of Iowa, and we discovered that if you don't die in Iowa, you have to pay for a special embalming and pay for the transportation. She died in Minneapolis, not in Iowa, right? Eric and I have our bodies going to the University of Iowa. And I'm like, we need to change that very quickly to the closest, least expensive medical school, right? So we do need to update ours. Things you might want to consider when you're drafting your will is having an inventory of assets. You'll find a piece in there, it has a coffee cup on it. It's a estate planning worksheet. It is so useful because you can document your information. Now, Eric and I only married 14 years ago, right? He does medical research. He's really smart, but he knows nothing about my board of pensions. He doesn't understand our health care through board of pensions. Actually, on our trip over Christmas, I was explaining to him that if I die, they'll have coverage for medical care for an additional year before you have to figure out medical coverage. I'm like, it's probably important you know this, right? But he doesn't know this stuff. And we have different bank accounts because we were so much older when we got married. So using that estate planning worksheet is not only good for if you're preparing to go to the lawyer to craft a will or update a will, but having that for your partner or your executor, letting them know where that is in a safe and secure place so they know what are those different accounts. There's a blank page on the back. You can list your passwords there. Of course, you want to keep it in a safe, secure location if you are writing down passwords, but you want them to be able to access that. Another reason Eric and I need to update our will, back when we wrote it back in 2014, there wasn't provision for social media, etc. We need to put that in our will so that whoever our executor is, whether it's Eric for me or I for him or my sister for us both, that they're able to do what they need to do to close down those accounts and manage them, right? You want to identify who are your beneficiaries, people, organizations that you love. You want to explore charitable giving options. Another handy thing for that back page is writing down your favorite scripture passages. When your service of resurrection happens, what are some favorite passages you want lifted up? What are some of your favorite hymns? Now, there was a church in Pittsburgh who called me out and said, Ellie, we need you to do a planned giving workshop because our folks aren't talking about this. And our organist died, and her family never considered that she would want a proper funeral. They had no funeral for her. The church grieved deeply, and they didn't have that closure to have that celebration of her resurrection, right? Putting that into a document could be so useful. When my dad died 2 years ago, he died on New Year's Eve. And he made me promise years before, about 4 or 5 years before, I would do his funeral. And so we had talked about his favorite passages and some of his favorite hymns, and I had some things written down and others were just in my mind. Remember, I told you my stepmother had vascular dementia. She was really confused at that time when it happened. I didn't have those hymns written down. I knew what they were. I told her what they were, and they weren't right. He died wee hours of Saturday morning and was buried on Saturday, January 7th, a week later. It gave us some time to figure out those hymns. My poor sister Jenny sat there with the Glory to God hymnal, singing hymns to Diana throughout the week, and Jenny doesn't consider herself a great singer. But finally, Thursday came, and they got that song, Here I Raise My Ebenezer. That's it! Yes, Jenny, that's what I told Diana at the beginning of the week. But she had confidence when she figured it out, right? But had it been written down, it would have been a lot easier. So use that back page. Whether it's Dr. Graham Walker or some other pastor in the future that is officiating your funeral, having that, you could put a copy in the office. At my church in Warren, I got there in June, and 3 weeks later, a 96-year-old died. She had her whole service written out and had it on file in the church. And every year and a half or so, she'd come in and stop by the secretary and say, I want to review it. Let me tell you, that made putting her service together so easy. You don't have to do all that work. But if you do have a few favorite passages or favorite hymns, it's helpful, right? As you think about a charitable component to your legacy, this is an opportunity to make a gift now or after your lifetime. We know that most of us, what we do have is probably tied up in a house or a condo or our retirement, right? Most of us aren't flush with money, but what we do have is usually available after our lifetime. So maybe that's when you make your gift. But there are some people who can't make the gift now, and they want to make the gift now because they want to see it in action. So it just is, what is right for you? How do you figure that out? If you're planning a bequest, know that you always have me you can call upon. I'm glad you can just say to Dr. Graham Walker, can you call Ellie and see if she'll come and have lunch with us? And I'll take you out to lunch. right? Now, you might not use any tools at the foundation, and that is perfectly fine. And I'm just providing you language you can take to your lawyer, so you save some bucks, but I give you some sample language you can take to the lawyer to achieve your goals. If it goes in your will, we'll never know about it at the foundation. But what we hope is that it's going to support the ministry here. And that's what's most important to us, right? So know that you can call upon me to walk alongside you if that is helpful as you plan your bequest. The things you want to think about: is it a specific amount, right? Is it a percentage of your estate or what's left over or residual? That example I gave in my sermon of Eric and me, that covers that as an example without even trying, right? I'm leaving, both of us are leaving a percentage, but mine is going into an endowment fund without any restrictions, right? So First Presbyterian Church of Warren will receive income every year in perpetuity, and the session can use that income in any way they see fit, right? Eric's gift is a direct bequest that will go, the whole sum will go straight to First Christian Church in Cedar Falls, Iowa, but it's restricted for a particular purpose. It can only be used to support children in need in the greater Cedar Falls, Waterloo community, right? So you can have a restriction or unrestricted. I'll tell you, the best thing for your church is having it unrestricted. Let the session decide how they can use it. If you do want a restriction, though, invite me into the conversation so I can help you think about what is it you're trying to do? How can we write it broad enough that it's not too restrictive? Like, there are churches who have had people write restrictions that it's to provide for wreaths in the church windows, right? Or we had a church in New York City that it was $1 million for the organ. They had a big hole in the roof of the sanctuary. It was raining in on the organ, but they couldn't touch that money to repair the roof, and the organ got damaged. They ended up spending the organ money to fix the organ, but they still couldn't fix the roof, right? So I'm glad to pull in the minds of the experts at the foundation who've been doing this for ages long beyond me to think about how do we listen to what it is you're trying to do, but is there language that we can help you fulfill your goals while still really being a useful gift for the church, right? So there are all these different ways, and I'll unpack them. You want to consider what kind of assets, whether it's life insurance or retirement plan, real estate, or non-traditional assets. There are a lot of different ways you can give, right? If you have life insurance, I could tell you Hanover Presbyterian Church would be very glad to get it. I will also tell you that being a nonprofit, we don't pay any taxes. Life insurance is the only non-taxable event. If you have human beings that you want to get anything, give them the life insurance first because they don't pay taxes on it. Now, if you don't have any human beings you want to give it to, Hanover's glad to receive it. But again, you can reduce tax implications by giving the life insurance first to human beings, right? But if you want to, you could name the church or a charity as the primary, secondary, or contingent beneficiary. You can transfer ownership to the church or charity, or you can even purchase a new policy for the church based on your own life. You might want to consider your retirement plan. For those, if you put your money in pre-tax, this is the highest tax portion of your estate, right? That went in pre-tax. We're talking your IRAs, your 401ks, 403bs, your KIOs. These accounts are included as part of your estate. Your heirs are subject to federal income tax. Now, they're not considered, if you have a will, your will doesn't govern it, because usually they have a beneficiary form. That beneficiary form will govern it. But, we had a church in Pittsburgh that there was a school teacher who was a really good saver and very frugal.
And she told the pastor, when I die, the church is going to give $1 million, get $1 million from me. Her money was all in her retirement. It was part of her estate, but she named the church as the beneficiary of 100% of her will. But because that retirement was governed by the beneficiary form, which is separate, her brother got it all. Legally, rightly so, but she was a little confused, right? So you want to think about that. But knowing that your retirement plan is the largest tax portion of your estate, and your heirs are subject to federal income tax, you have some options. You can designate the church or charity as a beneficiary. Or if you still want that to go to your heirs, you could name a charitable trust. We offer these at the foundation as a beneficiary to provide lifetime income to the person you select. Back in 2012 at First Presbyterian Church in Warren, we got a $70,000 gift. And it was part of a remainder from a charitable remainder trust. We didn't know this guy's name, so we did some digging. Turns out his mom and dad were active in our church back in the 60s, in the 50s and 40s, but they died. His dad in 63, his mom in 64. So a little weird in the session minutes, it told us what part of the church they were buried from, the dad from the sanctuary, the mom from the chapel. I don't know why they told us that. The neat thing is, we had some 70-year-olds in our church in 2012 who remembered this couple. And they were able to talk a little bit about their life and faith and why it was so important that nearly 40 years later, we get this major gift of $70,000. They provided for their son all those years and then leave this beautiful legacy to the church, right? You might also, if you have real estate, want to consider if you have highly appreciated low basis property. You can do a couple of things. You could get a charitable income tax deduction and avoid capital gains tax. You can give your home or farm and retain use during your lifetime. We at the Presbyterian Foundation, through our new covenant trust company, would receive that gift and receipt it to you, but we'd also do all the investigation and vetting to make sure you could afford to keep paying the taxes and the insurance and the maintenance and upkeep. But you could get an immediate charitable deduction while getting to continue to use it until your end of your life. And then, once you die, we would sell the property and the proceeds would go to your church and any other charities you designate, right? You can also name a charitable trust as the owner to provide lifetime income to you or others and support your church with the remainder in a similar way. Other things you could consider are non-traditional assets, like an art collection, a coin collection, or a business interest. Now, we had someone die, golly, this is 12 years ago now, and they left a teddy bear collection to their church. You want to guess how much that teddy bear collection was worth? Throw numbers at me. What do you think?
10,000.
15.
15.
Yeah, I wonder if it was those ties that were pricey. And there are some other fancy bears for a while there too, right? $15,000 for mission and ministry. Now, I have a colleague. Do you know Olanda Carr by chance? My buddy Olanda, Presbyterian elder down he's a member at First United Presbyterian Church in Charlotte. And their church has a creepy doll room. Someone let dolls to the church, but had a restriction that they could not be sold. The session foolishly accepted that gift. And so, it's not doing anything for mission and ministry, but there's a creepy doll room, right? There are some gifts your session might not want to receive, right? I did have a church, I talked about that teddy bear incident, and a church in my own presbytery called me and said, Ellie, do you remember your teddy bear story? We got dolls. What do we do with them? And we were able to help them find someone who could appraise them for them so they could sell them so then they could use it for mission and ministry. So we're always glad to be of support to you on matters like that. Different giving instruments you might want to consider. An endowment fund, a donor advised fund, a charitable remainder trust, or a charitable lead trust. We at the Presbyterian Foundation are known for our endowment funds. We have over $900 million in permanent endowment funds. Our oldest ones go back to 1821. Our first president of the foundation from 1799 to 1821 was Elias Boudinot. He was a Presbyterian elder. He was a member of the Continental Congress and president of it for a time. And when he died, he left 2 houses to the Presbyterian Church USA with specific purposes. They were to be sold and put into permanent endowment funds that generate income every year in perpetuity. And one goes to seafaring people in New York City and Philadelphia. The other provides theological books for feeble congregations across our denomination. Very interesting, huh? The cool thing about a permanent endowment fund, you can set this up for a minimum of $25,000, but the foundation holds title of this gift, but they invest it in such a way that their goal is to generate income, but have the principal preserved, but have it grow with inflation, because we know a box of Cheerios today at $6 is a lot more expensive than it was 4 years ago, right? So we want it to have that purchasing power. And so there's a little piece in there. It tells you about our permanent endowment funds, and you can see from 1980 to today how much, what it's worth today. So if you put 100,000 in 1980, it's worth 200 and some thousand today, but generated over 500 and some thousand for that intended ministry. So that's always an option. But it gives continuous support. If your church were to merge with another church, and as long as you're still Presbyterian, it's going to follow you there. If your church were to close and not merge with another church, but straight out close, then it would go to the presbytery to consider to continue ministry for the gospel in your region. But you could also name a contingent beneficiary. When you set it up, you can name, specifically, I want self-development of people, or Presbyterian disaster assistance, or maybe you just want to name Presbyterian of Newcastle, or a Presbyterian to support ministry in Wilmington, Delaware specifically. You get to choose if you want to set up that contingent when you establish it. Another item is a donor advised fund. I have one of these. This is like having a charitable checkbook. You can open a donor advised fund for $2,500, and you give the money to the Presbyterian Foundation. You open this donor advised fund, and it's like having a charitable checkbook, and you just go on and make grant recommendations to any 501c3. We want to make sure you're not getting any, like you can't send it to your college and have your grandkids get a free scholarship out of that. That's against the IRS. We make sure everything's in compliance, right? And it has to be support ministries of the PCUSA and beyond. If there is something antithetical to who we are as Presbyterians, if there is possibly a 501c3 connected to white supremacy like the KKK, we're going to say, please make a different grant recommendation, right? But otherwise, you can support lots of different ones. I love it. It's my place. I know a lot of people who died recently. I'm just at that age, right? And in lieu of flowers, I'd rather give to a charity in memory of them. I always have this money set aside. I can do that. Now, my daughter Ibby is 10. 5 years ago, we were out on a farm. We live on a 105-acre farm in southwest Pennsylvania. I'm a city girl, so it's a weird thing, right? But we're out on our farm, and I have my infant daughter Caroline on my lap, and we're heading out to our garden. So I'm riding the little riding mower, and Ibby wanted to race me, and she was so delighted because she beat me to the garden. And she started twirling and twirling around, and her hands were outspread, and she accidentally hit the muffler on the mower. burned the dickens out of her hand. We have a good friend who's a pediatrician. She ordered us this special silver whatever that you put on it and you care for the burn. But she was wrapped up for a good 3 or 4 weeks. Week and a half, 2 weeks after that, we're up in Erie with my sister visiting her, and her kids went to school all 12 years with the same kids. And all the moms would stay together, and they called themselves the tribe. And one mom had a pool, and so she invited the whole tribe over to go swimming. And since we were in town, we wanted to go with them. And Ibby at age 5 is a very curious kid. She's there with her bandage, and she gets there, and she sees a 12th grader who has bandages over her whole body. I knew about Lucy, but I had never met her. Her sister Liz was there too, with bandages all over her whole body. These 2 young ladies were born with a genetic anomaly. They have what's called butterfly syndrome. There's a formal name, I can't think of it, but their fingers are all nubs. You can't touch their skin without it breaking open. Their life expectancy is about 25 years old. And I always heard about Lucy because she and my nephew Jojo were good friends in the kindergarten, and he always stuck up for Lucy. Well, Ibby was so curious, and she said, "Mama, they have burns like me." So on the way home, Ibby, being not the usual 5-year-old, wanted to know more. So I pulled up the website, and we were listening to stories about this syndrome. And as I drove down I-79, I can see tears going down Ibby's face, and people are thinking, "You are a terrible mom." And I said, "Let me put that away, Ibby." And she said, "No, I want to know more. What can we do?" Ibby, there's not a whole lot we can do, but this organization, we're watching their videos. We can give money to them out of our donor advised fund to help find a cure, to help these girls have some longevity of life. Every year, we make a gift to Deborah in honor of Liz and Lucy. Liz is 26. She's already outlived her life expectancy. But with that DAF, I could teach my kid a little bit about philanthropy, but we also can say, we can't solve the problem, but maybe we can help a little bit, right? So I love a donor advised fund because you get to decide the amount of the grant and the timing. You can include your family members in the grant making process, help share your values. You can name them as co-grantors with you or successor grantors. You avoid the cumbersome responsibilities and the costs of a private foundation. Another story I have with our DAF, it used to be when you set it up at the foundation, it had a 20-year term. And 5 or 6 years ago, I got a call from our home office saying, "Ellie, you need to talk to this family in Seneca Falls, New York." It was January, and their DAF was going to be expiring at the end of the year. They said, "You need to talk to them and find out, let them know that they can give out whatever's remaining before the end of the year. If they don't, whatever's left over is going to go into 3 different charities that their mom named, or they can roll it into a new DAF and keep giving." Well, with that donor advised fund, those charitable dollars that were gifted away years before, their mom had set up how they'd be invested so they were earning income in the market. And so the family could give out 5% a year, and the money was still there, right? And because it was growing, and they were matching it. And so the daughter called me and said, "I talked to my 2 brothers, and over the last 20 years, we've distributed over $100,000 in Seneca Falls, New York, keeping our mom's legacy alive. We want to continue that." And they have. So they rolled it into a new DAF, which is just really a neat thing. My boss was telling me how his dad was a preacher, and one of his dear friends died about 5 years ago, but his wife only died last week at 104. And she had set up that her estate and any gifts from her memorial would go into a donor advised fund. that her 4 children are the advisors, and they'll be able to give gifts following their mom and dad's passion, as long as they're alive. And then they can name their successors to keep that going, which is pretty neat. Another thing, I mentioned a charitable remainder trust. This is income for you or your survivors. You can support mission after income is provided to you. We had a woman come to us at the foundation, it was just before I started, so about 13, 14 years ago. And she had Clorox stock that she had purchased at $8 a share. And at that point, it was worth over $16 a share. Now, she needed some money to live on. For her to cash that in, she would have paid capital gains. She had over $200,000 of Clorox stock that she gifted to the Presbyterian Foundation to establish a charitable remainder trust. She named her church for 50% of that, and a few other nonprofits for the remainder, but she was getting a percentage, and she was older, and there was good actuarial tables, so she was getting like 8 or 9% for her lifetime, and then after she died, her daughter would receive a certain percentage for a period up to 20 years. Then once that's over, the remainder goes to the church and other charities she named. So it's an opportunity to have an immediate tax deduction, avoid capital gains, and even have an estate tax reduction. Now, most of us don't qualify for this, but a charitable lead trust is for those who are extremely wealthy. Now, you will see that in 2017, the estate gift tax, federal estate gift tax exemption amount was $5.49 million. The generation skipping tax was $5.49 million. Over and above that, the highest estate gift and generation skipping tax rate was 40%, right? In 2018, when we had that new law come in changing our taxes, it jumped to $11.18 million. 2024, it's $13.61 million. Currently, it is scheduled to sunset back to that $5.49 million. Now Congress and the new administration may change it, but if you are someone who has over $26 million, it's not most of us, but if you are someone who has over $26 million, you might want a charitable lead trust where you can give a big sum to the church now, and church or charity of your choice is an irrevocable trust. You give it, it distributes income for 20 years, and once that period is over, whatever's remaining goes back to you or your heirs, but at greatly reduced tax rate. So just something to keep in the back of your mind if you know someone in that situation. I know you need to get off to your workshop. Thank you so much for being here. Are there any questions before we take off today? Thank you for your time, your attentiveness, for being here. Not everyone shows up at a workshop on Thanksgiving because people don't want to talk about death and dying. And sometimes I've only had like 6 or 7 people in the room. So thanks for being here. This was great. And I appreciate your time and your love of this